Okay. I'm just going to generally say welcome to those 80 odd people who have joined us already this afternoon. I've no doubt there will be a little trickle that comes in constantly over the next 5 minutes. So I will start in order to accommodate that with introductions of our speakers today, and me, in fact. So my name is Jill Fennick, and I am the CEO of Association for Cultural Enterprises. I've had so many jokes about my background that if anybody wants to think of any new ones and put them in the chat, please do. Most of them were like road jokes. So there we are. So welcome to this follow-up session. We 5 months ago had these same three prestigious people together to find out at the very beginning of COVID and the outbreak and lockdown what the effect had been on the tourism sector, particularly in visitor attractions. And it brought, I think, a very useful, wider perspective to what was actually happening in terms of who tourists were and who wasn't coming and who was, and many of the things that we don't necessarily hear all the time as ACE members, as commercial people. So we've invited Ruth, Bernard and Gordon back 5 months on. We had hoped it would be not in lockdown, but there we are. So that's just a twist in the tale that will no doubt add some piquancy to where we go next. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about the speakers. The first one to speak today will be Ruth Andrews, who is Special Advisor to the Association of Visitor Experiences and Attractions in Ireland. That's across the island of Ireland. It represents over 100 visitor experiences and attractions, from huge ones like the Titanic in Belfast to the Cliffs of Moher to tiny small ones such as Hoop Lighthouse and Spike Island. In response, however, to the recent crisis in Irish tourism, Ruth has recently been selected by the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport to be the independent chair of the government's Tourism Recovery Task Force. So that's Ruth, and welcome Ruth, and thank you very much for agreeing to talk. Next up will be Gordon Morrison, who is the CEO of ASVA, the Association for Scottish Visitor Attractions. That's again the trade body who represent the attractions sector in Scotland. He is a well-known face in Scottish tourism. He previously worked at Visit Scotland, and before that he worked for Museums and Galleries Edinburgh, where he led on shaping the visitor experience at places such as the Scott Monument and the Museum of Childhood. So that was Gordon. And then very much last but not least, Bernard, who will be familiar to many of you. Bernard Donoghue is the CEO of ALVA, the leading Visitor Attractions Association, the advocacy body and trade association for that sector. He is a trustee of the People's History Museum and a member of the Cathedral Council of St Paul's Cathedral. And like Ruth, is involved with the government in being a member of the Mayor of London's Cultural Leadership Board and is the Mayor's Ambassador for Culture. So I'm going to hand over very shortly to Ruth to set the scene for us. She's going to talk about the impact of COVID in Ireland, both expected and unexpected, the challenges since opening and into the future, but they're now back in lockdown, of course, so we'll take that one from Ruth. The industry and association response, and the future, living with COVID, stabilisation and recovery. I would just like to say to everyone, this is being recorded, so if you miss or you have to leave or whatever, it will be on our website very shortly, within the next 48 hours, or if you'd like a colleague indeed to watch it, that would be fine. So over to you, Ruth. I mean, great news at the moment, certainly vaccine-wise, everybody's starting to feel a little more perky, but of course nothing happens overnight, and I'm sure we all would love to hear what your plans are.
Thanks, Jill, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to be back after 5 months of times in which we all would have hoped might have moved on at a pace, or like many other crises, we could have learned to live with them easier and faster. But here we are, back in November. Almost a bit of deja vu in terms of the lockdown situation that we now have back again with us in Ireland, which we're just going in actually to the finish of week 3. So December 2nd is our release date, if you like. And I suppose where we're at right now is that at level 5, which is the top level in our 5 levels in terms of restrictions. We are hoping that by the beginning of December, and if not sooner, that the government will be able to give us a better indication of what their thinking is in terms of how we're actually going to come out of this particular lockdown. I prepared just a few thoughts on screen, so if I could share those instead of people looking at my face, it might be easier just to keep me on track in terms of my thought process. I think one of the things I've learned in the last 8 months is that unless I write it down now, it's getting awfully hard to remember the amount of things that happen in a day, let alone a week. And as we all know, we almost pivot daily to the plan that we made the day before. My opening slide here, actually, when I was just putting a few thoughts down on slides, I kind of went back to where we were almost a year ago at our conference that we had in Avia down in Limerick. And it was themed Vibrant, Evolving and Agile. Little did we know that evolving and agile would have the meaning that it brought to our doors by the middle of March this year. But you know what, if anything describes the visitor attractions space and the visitor experience space, agility is something that we're used to doing almost on a daily basis. But boy, has that really been something that we've really had to depend on over the last 8 months. I suppose I'm the baby organization of the 3 that are with you today, and I suppose 3 years is how long Avia has been established, and we started back in August 2017 with 55 members, and just double that by the time we got around to our 2019-2020 membership year. And our survey told us for 2019 that we welcomed 23 million visitors into Avia members' premises, and we had a significant turnover in terms of the revenue amongst those visitor members of 500 million. And we obviously had direct jobs attributed to our members' businesses of 4,500 direct jobs, but obviously there are an awful lot more jobs in communities and across industry related to our sector. And we are, like, I suppose, akin really more to Gordon's membership. We're urban, we're rural, we're private, we're public, we're indoor, we're outdoor, we're self-guided, we're guided, we're cultural and experiential. So it's a broad church, but a terrific broad church across the country. And I suppose that's just looking back to those heady days of 2019, which was, I suppose, yet again, another really strong year for Irish tourism, but particularly for our sector. I suppose you'd say one thing that you could certainly say is an accomplishment of having Avia in existence over those 3 years is what we set out to do. And one of our strategic goals was to strengthen the awareness and our industry voice. And I think there is no doubt that having done the work that we did over the last 3 years, and in times like these and the COVID crisis, there is absolutely no doubt that the firm recognition within the tourism industry in Ireland is that the visitor experience and attraction sector is a key enabler for the wider tourism ecosystem. And that is true of tour operators, of our transport providers, our accommodation providers, rural economies, both large and small. It now is really recognised because of the work and from having the platform and the networking and from having a very strong advocacy within the industry and across its stakeholders. The reality is now, as we all look towards recover from what is without doubt the worst and most existential crisis that has affected global tourism, is that visitor experiences are going to be vital to rebuilding tourism, and particularly on an international footing when it comes. So there is without doubt that awareness has come to pass. I suppose since we last had a webinar, I feel like I have been harnessed in, and I'm constantly swinging from whatever about tree to tree, but certainly mini crisis to mini crisis. So I think that picture probably best describes, even though I don't think I probably look that good in that harness. But let's just look at where we have come since the lockdown of the spring. And what was it that Avia spent all of our time doing over that exceptionally busy period? So I suppose from our perspective and from an association perspective, and very much along with our board members, because it really was all shoulders to the wheel, we spent a significant amount of time and engagement communicating government supports to our members, because the government supports that were made available since last March have been created in a lot of cases on the hoof by, I suppose, government departments that are not used to developing policy and measures in that way. So even when you take something like the TWSS, which was the Temporary Wage Subsidy Scheme, that had numerous iterations that, on a weekly basis, as we were feeding back, and across industry and across broad economy, people feeding back requests for further information or queries that were arising, we were constantly having to stay on top of understanding what government were putting in place and making sure that that was being understood and fed back out through our members. So we played a pivotal role in that, certainly in the early stages and throughout. Liaising with our own department and our own tourism agency, Fáilte Ireland, on specific requirements for our sector, and clarity on funding mechanisms that were being made available was again a key role that we fulfilled. Developing operational guidelines, we've all been through the process of that. And certainly that was a huge part of the work that we conducted through May, as we worked with our own department and government to make sure that there was a set of guidelines that were workable guidelines for our own sector as they developed those. And we had Fáilte Ireland put in charge of that, which actually was terrific, because having your tourism agency being the link between the Department of Health, Department of Taoiseach, and ultimately NEFIT, who are our National Emergency Health Team, was absolutely vital, and they played a significant role in that and took on a huge amount of work in that regard. The majority of our members, I'm pleased to say, did reopen, and of course they reopened between that process of May 20th and June 30th, and of course we had shifting timelines there, because initially we weren't going to be able to open until mid-July, and that all changed, again changing at very short notice. So people having the ability to actually be able to really move at pace through all of this was incredible. So again, our role was to assist them and to make sure that we were getting the information as close to the pulse as we possibly could. It was great to see the majority of our members open. Again, it was only to a domestic market. For some, domestic market is a key part of their business year on year. So they were ready to welcome back those domestic customers. But for some of our businesses, again, they would have gotten very little domestic business. Primarily, they would have been used to dealing with the international markets. So they had an enormous amount of work, and they again were constantly innovating, constantly learning, and constantly trying to make their product more accessible and more relevant to a domestic audience. And they had very little time to do that. They were doing it as they were operating, as well as getting used to all of those changes in terms of operational guidelines. So there was a huge variation in terms of performance, and it's very hard to kind of say what that was, even on an average basis. It did depend, I suppose, on where businesses were located, what type of business they were, indoors versus outdoors versus family friendly versus, I suppose, a more cultural experience. And I suppose international visitations that were not there in any way at all, and urban versus rural. The one thing we do know is that I suppose a lot of our rural and those visitor attractions and experiences in the traditional kind of holiday hotspots, we're actually very pleased with how they performed during July, August, September. But I can tell you from a city perspective, it has just been dismal. It has been so difficult. I mean, when you know that there are hotel occupancies, even in July of 11% in the capital city, back now down to about 7%. It's really shocking, and it's very difficult, obviously, when people don't traditionally come to cities for holidays, very hard to actually get domestic business to come into the cities and engage in visitor attractions. Obviously, we have a very small audience by comparison to the UK as well. So, you know, our domestic audience is very small, and they don't necessarily visit cultural institutions as often or as much as other destinations such as yourself. So that was an additional, I suppose, challenge for us. But one that fall to Ireland, who are responsible for domestic marketing. I mean, they stepped up to the mark. They really pushed hard to drive the business and try and upweight the demand for us. And that was hugely important. In terms of what we were doing with membership engagement, aside from all of the information gathering and distilling and sharing, we, during that period, particularly in the initial phases, did a lot of webinars that were relevant to our members' businesses, and we were constantly asking them, tell us, what do you need? We also kind of pointed them in the direction of other important webinars to their businesses. Again, I point back to Fáilte Ireland, who have the COVID hub, as they call it. And there is just such a wealth of information. They have been working at breakneck speed to try and get information up there at every level to try and keep businesses and employers and employees motivated. And particularly trying to keep that connection of employees who are now on short-term working weeks or who may have had to been let go. We found ways to try and keep them engaged so that we don't lose that connection with these really important people to our businesses. And so that they're still with us in times when we can take them back on a more full-time basis. One of the key things that we would have just started in March as this happened was our 2019 membership performance survey. And we really had to work very hard to get that finished, because you can imagine not many people had the appetite to be filling out forms at that time. But it was key that we got that information and we got that survey completed, and it has really, again, served us well in terms of our advocacy across stakeholders, across government. It's been hugely important to have that. So we got that through and we got that done in June, and that was hugely important. And we've had ongoing SNAP surveys, like every representative association. We're constantly looking for intel from our members, and we're constantly being asked for that intelligence as well, so that, you know, we can inform government policy, inform what the agencies are doing for us. And I have to say, increased board engagement with Fáilte Ireland. Fáilte Ireland are pivotal to everything that happens in tourism as our tourism authority here. And in fairness to Fáilte Ireland, you know, they were quite open and willing to engage with us. You know, every 6 weeks we've been having meetings with the chief executive and the senior management team, and particularly the management team that are in charge of our sector. So they have been absolutely hearing us, listening to what we're saying, hearing what we're asking them to put forward through their own network, through our own department, and into government. So that's been very important to us as well. So I suppose government supports what's been going on. And again, you know, a huge part of our advocacy over the last 5 months has been about trying to push hard for our members to make sure that they get through the survival phase. So I'm just going to give a quick run through these, and I'm sure they're going to be similar to what we might hear elsewhere. We started off with the TWSS, the Temporary Wage Support Scheme, and that progressed after our July budget, our mini budget in July, to the EWSS. We've been fighting hard to get the TWSS continued, because it really is essential, a people-facing business and a labour-intensive business. This was hugely important to us. The government chose to actually reduce the subsidy that they were making available through the TWSS. So the EWSS is there. I suppose what they've tried to do is, although it's not as advantageous and certainly not as supportive in terms of the financial support it brings, what we are going to have with the EWSS is we're going to have it for a much longer period. So there's been a commitment given by our government to make sure that there is a wage subsidy support scheme in place for all of 2021. The current scheme, which is the EWSS, will be in place until March. In February, the government say they will relook at that in terms of what the scheme will be for the remainder of 2021, but they have committed to making sure that there is an employment subsidy scheme in place for all of next year. Commercial rates waiver, that happened from the get-go. In the latest budget, that was extended until the end of the year. Of course, the problem with all of these things is we're giving them in bite-sized chunks. From a strategic perspective, we need to know about the longer term. The hope is that we will get those commercial rates for where it's relevant to businesses extended again up until mid of next year. So we've already started that advocacy. There have been restart grants made available through local authorities. So again, they have been very helpful to the visitor attraction sector. There are microfinance loans available, and they're probably the most advantageous that are out there at the moment for those businesses, and they do allow for no interest. They're interest free for the first 6 months, but they do come obviously with interest rates applying. We've had tax warehousing measures. We've had adaptation grant aid, which has been, again, very helpful as we sought to open our businesses, and they were made available to our members right up until October. That grant aid support stayed open to allow people to avail of it. There were further grant aid supports in budget 2021, and the visitor experience and attraction sector are going to be within the category of availing of the grant aid support. However, we still don't know what that's going to be. So there was 55 million committed for grant aid support to the tourism industry, and it will be administered through Fáilte Ireland, who have yet to come and tell us what the application and criteria process is going to be. So we're working hard with them to try and get that clarity at the moment. The tourism VAT rate was restored to 9% only until the end of 2021. We'll take it, but it needs to be longer. We also got a thing called the CRSS, and this is the COVID restriction support scheme. This was introduced by the government along with the Living with COVID plan, where you have the 5 different levels. And what was happening initially was that as different regions or counties went into higher areas of lockdown, there will be a rush to see how that particular county will be supported, how the business and economy will be supported. So the CRSS was introduced so that government now have a scheme in place that once we go into level 3, 4 or 5, businesses can now avail of this scheme. There is a slight problem with this scheme in that it is not available to all visitor experience and attractions, particularly those who are the not-for-profit or charitable organisations, unfortunately. So it's not going to be that meaningful for our sector. Again, tax back scheme versus a holiday voucher. Again, we had that introduced in July, where there was an incentive given to domestic holiday makers to avail of taking a domestic holiday. Unfortunately, in spite of our best efforts to make sure that visitor attractions were included in that, we weren't successful. However, that scheme really didn't kick off because most of the country went into lockdown from October when this scheme was due to come in. So it's actually dormant at the moment, and nobody really knows what's going to go on other than it does need to be revised, and we'll be advocating yet again for that in the near future.
Ruth, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I am conscious of time, and there's so much information here. It's absolutely fantastic, and we can always, well, of course, we will be posting it to the website. If you wouldn't mind helping me by just picking out the salient points,
Sure.
Because I can see you've got quite a bit of content left to come. Sorry, I'm just conscious of.
No, you're very good. No, keep me on time, Jill, because somebody needs to do that. Look, I suppose from an advocacy perspective, the one thing I can say is that, Avia have been at all of the tables. And as you mentioned, I was asked to chair the Tourism Recovery Task Force here in Ireland. We completed our work at the end of September, and it fed into the budget 2021 cycle. So that's been very helpful. We've also been invited on all of the key government forums that have been put in place, from the Tourism and Hospitality Forum, which is actually sat on by our Taoiseach as well as our Minister. So it's good to have the Taoiseach, the Deputy Prime Minister, sitting and listening to us quarterly on what our issues are. So we've done a lot of work in terms of the advocacy piece, and that's just going to be ongoing. It's a weekly process at this stage. In terms of the future, well, the future is kind of going to be about short-term survival focus. It's going to be about funding and level playing fields. Because our biggest issue at the moment is that visitor attractions under our Living with COVID plan close and have to be closed at level 3. So we can only be open at the first 2 levels. So that's something we're taking on at the moment, and we really are advocating hard to try and get government, when they reopen us in December 2nd, that they actually reconsider and reposition us within those levels, because there is no reason why we should not be allowed to open at level 3. Return to international tourism, we all know, is absolutely vital. Rapid testing and international cooperation. The EU traffic light system, which we have now embraced, and we're working towards implementing that as it comes. We now have testing being announced at all of our airports. As from today, Dublin Airport have a new testing centre open that will be able to clear 15,000 people a day as and when required. Innovation is going to be key, and association strategy. We're actually going to have a strategy session later this week with the board, actually looking at, where are we now as the association and what's our direction for the future. And I suppose just some of the things in terms of learnings and opportunities. I think some of the learnings that we've had is we've just got to keep innovating. We've got to be nimble on our feet, and we've got to stay agile. I suppose recognition that recovery requires a strong visitor attraction sector. That's been a huge learning, and it is an opportunity now for this sector to really push for their voice in terms of what comes with recovery. A sustainable recovery, we need to think about what tourism is going to look like in 5 years' time. Capital investment in digitalization, that's something we've really pushed, and we will be pushing hard for, because that's going to be a win for the sector ultimately. And investment in our people, it's going to be absolutely about keeping our people, finding ways of making sure we don't lose that intellectual capital we have and those vital people that we have. So we're really going to work hard to make sure that we're upskilling and keeping people engaged over the coming 6 to 8 months.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ruth. That is really, really a huge amount of information, and all very valid. And I'm sure our colleagues on the panels will recognise a lot of the content there. I am going to, in an effort to keep to more time, I'm going to ask those of you who may have questions for Ruth to put them into the chat, if you wouldn't mind. And Ruth, if you wouldn't mind keeping your eye on the chat and just seeing if there's anything particular comes up for you, that would be tremendously helpful. So thanks to the audience. I'm moving on now to Gordon Morrison from ASFA. Gordon, what's the situation like in Scotland? Tell us all. Well, not all, but all.
Thank you very much indeed, Jill. Can everyone see that? I'm sharing my screen here. Is that,
yes.
that
yeah,
excellent?
See it. Yeah.
So firstly, a big thank you to you, Jill, for having me back after 5 months. It feels like longer than 5 months, to be honest with you. We've gone through so much in this time, and it's great to share the stage with Ruth and Bernard again. I also want to share a quick thank you to each of them. They've been great at sharing information with me and dialogue, and that collaboration between the different trade associations and yourself, Jill, has been really, really great. It's one of the big things I think that's come out really well through this COVID crisis. So it's lovely to see everyone again. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give you an update from Scotland just now. I'm going to share some insights from our most recent member survey that I thought might be quite useful. Probably for the main reason that it shows we're all in the same boat as much as anything else. Now, I should say this survey was conducted in early October. We had over 350 attractions take part in the survey, so the data is probably about as robust as it can get, to be honest with you. However, I'll immediately caveat by saying that it's 5 or 6 weeks old now. Therefore, it's probably out of date. I can't believe it's the speed that we move at just now, as Ruth mentioned, in terms of where COVID restrictions go. It moves so fast that we're probably talking about some data that needs to be adjusted already. All the responses that we collected came before the new strategic framework was introduced in Scotland. That's when we moved to a 5-level system that has seen the tightening of restrictions in some areas, particularly around travel restrictions in the central belt of Scotland, in fact across whole vast swathes of Scotland actually. So it's likely that some of these results portray a slightly more positive outlook than where we actually are. right now, especially as the tightening of restrictions came during the October holidays, which was seen as the last hurrah for many attractions before the long, hard winter set in. And unfortunately, we didn't see a great October period because of the tightening of restrictions. Similar to Ruth, though, before I start on the picture now, I want us all to bask in the rosy glow of 2019 for a second. I think it's important to look back at 2019 because it's worth reminding us all just how important attractions are to the tourism economy, in this case in the Scottish context, but it applies across all the countries. So if I can just share, there we go. Firstly, I should immediately apologise for the picture here. That is talking about happy memories of 2019. That's a very self-indulgent picture. My daughter was born in 2019, so therefore I'm including Georgia in this picture. That was her helping me put together a previous presentation from earlier on in the year. I'm probably going to talk about as much sense as Georgia just now, I should say as well. So 2019, where were we? Over 65 million people visited attractions in Scotland in 2019. And they spent over £96 million purely on admissions and retail and catering alone. We had a total workforce of more than 17,000 working in the sector. 2019 saw growth in visitor numbers for the 7th year in a row. It made my job very easy to be reporting on the success of visitor attractions in Scotland. The top 2 attractions received more than 2 million visitors each. Those were Edinburgh Castle and the National Museum of Scotland. Now, Bernard will correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm going to quote some Alva figures here, Bernard. That made Edinburgh Castle and the National Museum 2 of only 3 attractions outside of London to break the 2 million mark. Would that be right, along with Chester Zoo? Yeah. And then heritage tourism was estimated to be worth £1.8 billion to the Scottish economy. So a really positive picture. And this isn't even mentioning the crucial role that attractions play in preserving and presenting Scotland's culture and identity. So what we can say with real absolute clarity is that attractions were and are central to the success of Scotland's tourism industry. And it's important that we don't lose sight of that now when we look at where things are at the moment. And that's what I'm going to come on to just now. So we'll do a quick temperature check of where we are at the moment. As I said, the data here is presented from our last survey, which took place last month. So 1 in 3 attractions have not reopened this year following the lockdown. In Scotland, the lockdown ended in mid-July. For most, outdoor attractions got to open at the end of June, but 34% of the sector decided not to reopen. The primary reason for this was concerns about economic viability due to capacity restrictions, also a perceived lack of demand and drop in visitors, particularly from international market that Ruth has mentioned already, and but also staffing level concerns. That was another area, particularly from those attractions that relied on a volunteer workforce, which tended to be made up more of groups that could be vulnerable to coronavirus, and those groups didn't really want to come back into customer-facing roles, so some attractions weren't able to reopen because of that. 80% of attractions have seen maximum capacities reduced by at least 50%. The important point to make there is in Scotland, as opposed to other parts of the UK, we still have got 2 metre physical distancing or social distancing in place. And this has made it very difficult for attractions to operate with capacities that are economically viable. And I'll speak a wee bit more about that in a second. Current data says that visitor numbers are 76% down on 2019 levels. Actually, it's a bit of a mixed picture here. As Ruth said, it's a difficult one to talk about. Outdoor sites are definitely way outperforming indoor attractions. I've looked at the data for September, for example, and outdoor sites were approximately 20% down in last year. Whereas if you look at museums, they were over 80% down on last year. Perhaps the most telling stat that I'm going to talk about is comparative turnover is down by 90% or more at 2/3 of visitor attractions. When we burrowed into this data a wee bit more, almost 1/3 of attractions in Scotland have seen a turnover decrease by 90% or more on 2019. So there is a big economic black hole at many sites. Another telling stat is that only 23% of attractions were able to operate at an economically sustainable level when they did reopen. So even when they were open again, attractions have struggled to make money effectively. The biggest reason for this has been the 2 metre physical distancing that I mentioned before, which really has severely limited capacities. though it's also a simple fact that the audiences have not been back at the same levels as we've seen in 2019. And of course, we've lost the big international spenders, and there have been no profitable events either, no weddings, no other big events that would normally take place at attractions. And a final point to make on where we are right now, the latest restrictions have seen many more attractions temporarily closed. This is a new thing. This has just happened in the last couple of weeks. As of a couple of weeks ago, the Scottish Government introduced a new 5-level strategic framework. Much of the country is now in level 3, possibly even moving into level 4, which includes really severe travel restrictions. So although attractions can open, and ASVA did a very important job in lobbying to allow attractions to stay open right the way up from level 0 to level 3, unfortunately, people are not allowed to travel between local authority areas, meaning there's a very limited customer base. So a lot of attractions have now decided to close, take full advantage of the furlough scheme and really just mitigate their losses. Not all though, again, it's a mixed picture. Those with a strong local audience or those with major family appeal have stayed open and are actually doing pretty decent business just now. There's also some big Christmas events coming up, such as the Christmas lights at Edinburgh Zoo, for example, and attractions like that definitely don't want us to move into a full-scale lockdown because there's still plenty of business out there for them. I'll just whiz through, Jill, I'm just conscious of time. In terms of financial support in Scotland, what has been given has been very welcomed, don't get me wrong, but has been in no means mitigated the major losses that I've described already. 2/3 of the survey respondents from our survey said that they're using or have used the coronavirus job retention scheme, and this is by far the most access support mechanism at Scottish attractions, and therefore it's highly beneficial that this has been extended again, and we're really, really pleased that it has been extended again, although admittedly we'd like it to see extended for even longer. 38% have been able to access Scottish Government grant support, specific grant support from the government. This support has actually been fairly limited, but to be fair, those that have received it, about 2/3 found it to be either essential or highly beneficial to business survival. So it has been really important for a number of our members. 18% have been able to access other grant support. So that's things like there's a third sector resilience fund, there's a Museums Gallery Scotland Heritage Fund, National Lottery Emergency Fund. Again, those that accessed it have found it really, really beneficial, but there just hasn't been that much ability to access it. And that is because the eligibility criteria has been a barrier to accessing a lot of the grant support. Much of the government support, for example, was based on rateable value, and that caused a lot of problems for members. There was other support based on whether you were a pivotal enterprise or not, and the definition of pivotal enterprise was difficult to ascertain, to be honest with you, and it meant that a lot of our members weren't able to access support, despite the fact they were fully meriting support. So we fed this back to the Scottish Government, and we've stated that any future funding needs to be easily accessible, and those businesses that truly need it should not be falling through the cracks. We have been speaking to the Scottish Government about this just in the last week. We've been assured that more support is forthcoming, but we don't really know what that support is going to look like as yet. We continue to feed directly into the Scottish Government about the challenges that the attraction sector face and the lack of the really meaningful grant support that there has been for the sector, and we're going to continue to feed into the Scottish Government of that. Now, I'm going to get a wee bit more positive as well, Jill, because that's just all doom, doom, doom. So let's get a wee bit more positive. There have been some real positives as well, and we've seen the sector react really well to the new normal that we find ourselves in. The first point I made there is adaptability and embracing change equals safety and great experience. It's a hugely important point. The sector moved incredibly quickly and adapted remarkably well to make experiences COVID safe. We saw a rapid increase in the likes of time ticketing and online booking, although I admit there's still some work to do in that. About 40% of attractions in Scotland are still not bookable online. We'd like to see that change. We saw investment in new signage, PPE equipment, and this was done with some ingenuity and fun, as you would expect from our sector. We are a creative bunch, and this has been reflected in how the safety protocols have been shared with consumers. It's been great to see this brought into and become really part of the visitor experience. That's what's done really well at visitor attractions. We saw the introduction of highly visible cleaning protocols, highly visible being the key phrase here, as there's no doubt at all that visitors want to see this as a reassurance as much as anything else. They want to see people out cleaning. And crucially, I would say really crucially, we didn't forget and we do not forget how important staff are in delivering the personalised, memorable experiences. And this is really backed up when you look at TripAdvisor and Google reviews. I've spent a lot of time looking at reviews from across our member sites, and you'll see countless positive reviews about the visitor experiences since COVID-19 protocols have been introduced. Bernard, I'm conscious that you often use a stat that says that 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor are 4 times more likely to feature a person's name. I think that's right, and that shows the importance of staff. I would argue now, I would say now, that 5-star reviews are probably 10 times more likely to make reference to how safe the experience was and what a good job staff did in ensuring that it was a safe experience. And the final stat that I've got there for the positives is that to date, 0 cases of COVID-19 have been linked directly to visitor attractions in Scotland. And this is testament to the great work that has been done in adapting experiences at attractions. It's a stat that I trot out all the time to the Scottish Government that shows that attractions are delivering safe, outstanding experiences. And they've adapted so well to do this. In terms of key asks, almost done now. You'll be happy to know, Jill.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
The key asks that we have just now, again, so we've asked our members about this, and in the survey responses provided us with really clear steers. Effectively, it can split into 2 areas. The first is financial support, unsurprisingly. The extension of the furlough scheme, it was seen as an absolute priority, and therefore it is really pleasing to see that's been extended to March just now. The point about grants, not loans, this is a really, really important one. Our members made it very clear that they need grant support and not loan support. Many attractions are not-for-profit businesses, for example, and loans are simply no use to them, absolutely no use to them at all. So we need to see effective grant support for the sector. We also need to see a level of grant support that helps to mitigate the massive losses that we've seen this year, not just to help you to sustain your operations, but mitigate those massive losses. Much of the existing support that we've seen in Scotland barely touches the sides when you compare it to the level of money that has actually been lost from the sector. The VAT cut was another welcome move, but our members are keen to see this extended yet further, at least until the end of 2021. The second key asks were around just supporting and allowing attractions to flourish. Our members made it very clear that they're keen to see increased spend on marketing targeted at the domestic audience, not just the domestic audience, not just being in Scotland, but the rest of the UK as well. There's a recognition that this market is going to be key in 2021. This is still going to be the key market in 2021. There's no doubt about that. So our members are looking for Visit Scotland to ensure that they are effectively marketing to domestic audiences, and the messages that we're getting out there to all parts of the UK is you're very welcome to Visit Scotland. Crucially, there's also the key ask of allowing attractions to operate at 1 metre physical distancing. I cannot emphasise this enough. It will make such an important difference to our sector. If many in the sector are going to be able to get back to trading as economically viable as possible, they cannot be hamstrung by being forced to have capacities limited to about 20% of normal levels. So that definitely needs to change. And there's also been a call for more incentivisation schemes akin to the eTech to Help Out scheme. It was hugely successful, definitely saw people get out and visit again. Although, of course, many are now blaming that for the second wave, aren't they? So, yeah, we have to be careful with that as well. Final slide, just very briefly going to talk about what the future holds. So, and by future, I mean immediate future here. Firstly, our members didn't think there was going to be a big winter season. So very few of our seasonal members decided to extend their season. A quarter said they would, 3 quarters said they wouldn't. And actually looking into the quarter that said they would, many of them have decided not to, now that the restrictions have got tighter. We also asked members about the security of their business in the short, medium and long term, with short being 1 to 3 months, medium being 3 to 12 months, and long being 12 months plus. Now, the results here were actually better than we thought they would be, and they were certainly better than they were when we asked the same question back in July. As you'll see from the slide here, only 35% of members felt that their business was insecure in the long term. I say only, but only there is actually, that means 120 attractions feel that their business is insecure beyond a year. So it's actually still a pretty damning picture, to be honest with you. However, there are better results, as I said, than we had back in July and also back in April when we asked the same question. And that's probably because the sector has shown great resilience, and we're certainly showing no signs of extinction as yet. And that's probably as good a point to end it on as ever. The picture is a challenging one, but we do have a massively resilient, resourceful and adaptable sector. And we have proven already we can bounce back, and we can bounce back and deliver really, really positive visitor experiences. And that has to give us hope for 2021. And I think Bernard's going to talk more about hope in a minute. So I'll probably just end there. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much, Gordon. Before Bernard talks about hope, which we all look forward to immensely, I would just say that actually I am going to extend this. This is such rich content. I am going to extend this by 15 minutes, this session. So if you have to fall off, then, as I say, catch up online. But I think it's well worth taking time for Bernard's presentation, clearly. But this question, which has just actually come in on email, someone asks, and it's pertinent to take it at this point, I think, before we move on to Bernard. Museums in Ireland are closed under level 5, and if we go back to level 3 in December, they will stay closed, but museums in Scotland are open. How can we convince the Irish government to let us open, which we can do in a safe way as we demonstrated in the summer? Any lessons from Scotland? I haven't got a name to that one, but what's your thoughts on that, Ruth?
Well, the emailer is correct, and it is a cause of great frustration, and we have a campaign around it. In fact, only that just there before I came on here, I just approved with our chairman the press release that will be going out on it later today. But we have been engaging with government, we've been engaging with our own department. And often our own department, who will raise the issues for us, it gets raised beyond their level, if you like. It has to go into HSE department on Taoiseach and NEFIT. And often they have other things that they deem as being more important. So we're a bit further down the line in terms of getting the answers, even in terms of the rationale behind it, which we still don't understand. So we are continuing to try and get clarity, to try and get a revision of that, certainly at level 3, because we just don't understand why that would be the case. And we've made the case for all of the obvious reasons, and I know the emailer will know well what they are, as to why we should be allowed to open. And particularly in the run up to Christmas and in December, it's hugely important that even if people are only going to be able to move in a limited capacity, these are places that can take people. It allows people to get out, allows people to actually come together, even as families. And it's just ridiculous that we can't open in any shape, manner or form for the museums, galleries, for anybody indoors, in fact. So anything Gordon could bring to lend weight to that, and that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I know that Ruth and I had this kind of conversation just last week, actually. We were chatting about this, and what I would say in Scotland, we did have the opportunity to have dialogue with the Scottish Government, with the National Clinical Director and others about the different levels, the levels 0 through to level 4. And the point that we made, originally attractions were going to be closed at level 3. We were going to be told that we had to be closed at level 3. So we asked the question, why? Why would the attractions be closed at level? What are the main reasons for this? And the answers we were given was around, it was concerns about grouping of visitors. It was about people spending a lot of time in one location. And so we then put forward proposals for how that could be mitigated effectively, by saying, right, okay, well, if we ensure that there are sufficient levels of staff, for example, to move visitors round an attraction, would that mean that we'd be allowed to have the attractions open at level 3? And so for each point we went through, we gave a mitigating measure. And the Scottish Government eventually said, yes, if these things are in place, you'll be allowed to have attractions open at that level. So when you look at the guidelines for the visitor attractions in Scotland, it does say that yes, they can be open, but only with mitigating measures and COVID protocols in place.
Thanks, Gordon. That's really, really helpful. Thank you, Ruth. Thanks for that. I'm going to now hand over to Bernard for his joy and hope. But I first of all, Bernard, you have an extraordinary T-shirt on. Do you have an extraordinary T-shirt on? Would you like to show us your T-shirt?
Well, I'm very conscious that we've got 10 minutes.
We've got longer because I've just
So
extended it.
thanks to my colleagues for shutting me up here. My T-shirt is from the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust shop. I thought this was very important and appropriate for today. It's to be or not to be, that is the question. We are going through an existential crisis in tourism. So I'm going to do two very, very quick things within 5 minutes. One is to tell you 5 things that we've learned in the last 7 months. And the second is an exclusive here on the webinar, which are the most popular, the most bought products in ACE and Alva member shops over the last 7 months online when people have been in lockdown. So let me just whip through these very quickly. What do we love? What have we learned? What's been brilliant? Front of house staff. As Gordon was saying, we've done some research. Unsurprisingly, it says that the person, the thing that makes the difference between a good visitor experience and an excellent one are people, your front of house staff. And we've asked them not just to be friendly and warm and accepting and say hello, we've also asked them to police behavior this time round. And that's a difficult ask, but because of their diligence and the work and preparedness of cleaning operations, front of house, we know that the community transmission of COVID at visitor attractions is statistically negligible, i.e. under 1% for the whole of the UK. I mean, that's astonishing. Astonishing. It also means it gives me real muscle when I go in to talk to Treasury and to Number 10 and Prime Minister and the First Minister to talk about the fact that actually draconian restriction measures shouldn't be applied to venues who've done the right thing and have proved to do the right thing, number one. Number two, digital. Everyone went mental on digital in April and May. It was fantastic. It was illuminating. The digital staff at your visitor attractions were amongst the heroes of all of this, but it did show us that you can be very creative, but digital is great at enticing and inviting and exciting people to come, but it doesn't replace the visitor experience. So actually use your creativity that you've learned in the last 7 months to get people to cross the threshold to come to visit your site. 3, creative risk-taking and shorter decision-making times. It's amazing how quickly a decision can be made now as compared to a year ago. Let's not go back to massive committees and bureaucratic structures. Let's actually be lithe and flexible and take decisions when we know it's the right thing to do and just be a bit more inspirational. 3, tourism, and you heard this from Ruth and you heard it from Gordon, tourism is now better appreciated and understood at the highest levels of all governments across the UK and the Republic of Ireland than it ever has been. This always happens in a crisis. You know, we always wait for a crisis to politicians to get it. Well, now they really get it, because guess what? Tourism and hospitality are the places that actually make life worth living. You know, going out, arts, cultures, where people grow where they're born. Attractions have been shown love by visitors, and not just when they turn up. I mean, the reviews that Gordon was mentioning about safe and secure is something that we at Alva have been talking about right from the outset. Sanitize your site, not the visitor experience. People still want to have a fantastic, enjoyable, joyous day when they visit you. They want it to be safe, and that's a kind of given, but they still want it to be joyous too. And lastly, as if you ever needed the reminder, you and your colleagues at Visitor Attractions, you create the backdrops for people's happiest memories. What an extraordinary responsibility, but also what an opportunity to make people have some of the most important experiences now and in the future because of what they've gone through. Right, so those were the 5. What does I think the next 12 months look like? One is, if you see what people have been watching during lockdown, the TV program here in the UK that had the greatest percentage increase in visitors was Repair Shop. Now, I think that's fascinating. I think it means that people really value memories and stuff that's been handed down, and increasingly those kind of intangible things, which are not necessarily linked to monetary value. This is the opposite of Antiques Roadshow. This is not about cash. This is about memories. Those things have become really important. I predict, here we go, I predict an explosion in the experience economy next year. People have learnt over the course of the last 7 months in lockdown, actually, they want to spend time with their family and friends. They don't necessarily want more stuff. But you work in retail largely, so that's not a good message, except here's what people bought from you during lockdown. This is the number one is the most popular bought thing, and then it's a kind of mishmash. But these are the 10 things most bought by the public during lockdown when you were not open and they were buying online. And I'm going to tweet this, by the way, so you know you've got the data. Number one. I'm conscious this is like retail bingo now, so cross these off at home. Number one, jigsaws. Number two, board games that you have around the kitchen table. Number three, cake making and baking. Number four, garden tools. Number five, garden seeds. Number six, children's picture books. Number seven, domestic history books, i.e. the story of your town, your street, your city. 7, ancestry products, genealogical tourism. Where do I come from? Because God knows where I'm going. Number 9, animal adoptions at zoos and safari parks. And number 10, thank God, this is largely me, cocktail makers, shakers, and glasses. Now, take that list and just sit back and think, that's not unlike the repair shop. Actually, what that list reveals is that people wanted stuff from heritage, nostalgia, things of their past, things of their childhood, unsophisticated, rather simple stuff. I mean, a couple of, like cocktails, something to treat yourself at the end. But actually, what they want is to be surrounded by comfortable things that don't cost a lot, because they fundamentally know now that experiences are more valuable than stuff that you get from Amazon. Now, if you can't be optimistic about that, the Association for Cultural Enterprises, God knows what you're going to be fascinated by. So there we are. That's my top luck. And thank you very much. Over to you.
Oh, Bernard, that was far too brief.
I know. I mean, I rehearsed a full 45 minutes, I tell you.
Far too brief. Thank you ever so much. I think that's really, really brilliant. And thanks for doing that digging about in the research of the online content. It doesn't surprise, it wouldn't surprise our audiences too much, I guess. Certainly the National Trust for Scotland and English Heritage speakers in the past that we've had across the last few months have noted these patterns and have been ahead of the game to some extent in presenting their web content, their shops in this way. So in the summer, certainly it was outdoor stuff for kids as well, slides, Wendy houses, tents, things like that. Anything to keep children occupied during the lockdown period was very saleable. But yes, you're quite right, games and the such. And I don't think that will end. I don't think necessarily it will do, but it used to be tea towels and fridge magnets. Those were the biggest sellers for everybody. But obviously there's just only so much washing up you can do. So, you've got to take a lesson from what you've learned there. There was one question came in from Penny Smout. I don't know where she's from. This may be a little bit specific, but it's actually very timely on the back of Bernard's session. Are you seeing any changes in customer spending on Christmas gifts? Are levels lower or higher? Good man. Are they favouring certain types of products over others? For instance, tangible items versus vouchers for future experiences. So that's very pertinent. Bernard, would you like to?
Yeah, we've seen, I just did a piece for the Daily Telegraph, a Sunday Telegraph rather, yesterday, which is the message that should go out to people this winter. One, if you can visit an attraction, do. If you can't, go online and buy in the shop. And while you're there, buy yourself a membership or buy a gift membership for someone that you love. Share the love. So we have been seeing a big increase. I mean, in some organizations, up to 42% increase in membership purchases, even during lockdown when they couldn't actually use it. Now, for me, this is a kind of benign philanthropy. It's a way of giving to the places that you love through cash, but then you also get a bit of transactional value for it as well. So yeah, I mean, the Christmas ranges that we've been seeing echo all the stuff that I've just been reading out, plus that kind of repair shop, you know, back to basics, more simple, less indulgent, less sophisticated. But we're seeing really good purchase, and also people want to buy stuff at places that they care about, particularly charities. And let me just say, Jill, while I've got the kind of floor for a second, if you're a charity, stress it. So many visitor attractions which are charities don't say it explicitly. They just kind of think that everybody knows that they're a charity, and people really don't. I mean, there was a survey done about, gosh, I think it was about 5 years ago, that 29% of the UK didn't know that the National Trust was a charity. You know, you can't take this for granted. Stress that you're a charity, people feel better about giving you the money rather than Amazon the money.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Actually, there was a very interesting example in Charleston House in East Sussex, home to the Bloomsbury set, Vanessa Bell, Duncan Grant, the painters, who have run a campaign of reopen Charleston, help us to reopen Charleston. And instead of just asking for donations, what they've done, I thought it was quite a crafty, not crafty, but very clever twist on it. They've got a range of things that you get in return for your level of giving. So if you give £45, you get a frame print of the Charleston kitchen, which is, you know, beautiful. And so on and so forth. And actually, you know, the cost of the gift is minimal to them. It's probably overstock that they're carrying anyway. But in the space of something like 5 weeks, they seem to have achieved this fantastic amount of money. It was in the hundreds of thousands in order to get them to where they needed to be, which is absolutely saying, we are a charity, we can't do this without you, we're an independent, you know, and I'm always astonished at the success of crowdfunding, actually, to be honest. Anything you'd like to add, Gordon?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, obviously, I think Bernard's covered pretty much everything there. The only thing I'll add to that is, Bernard's mentioned the people craving experiences. So there's a real opportunity to look at how you can offer premium experiences, something that's a bit more special, a bit more expensive. Just the other week, I had the opportunity to go and experience an afternoon tea at one of ASVA member sites at Macintosh at the Willow, which is a beautiful tea room in the heart of Glasgow. And they'd introduced a new premium afternoon tea product. Now, effectively, the afternoon tea was identical to what you would get in a normal afternoon tea, but this time they'd moved it into their Salon Deluxe special room, which was you could only fit a small number of people in it because of distancing, but also because it's a smaller space. It was designed by Macintosh. It is a beautiful space, and included in your afternoon tea was a talk about the room and what made the room special. And and they were charging double the price, more than double the price, sorry, for that afternoon tea compared to the normal afternoon tea, and sold out. Completely sold out. So look at what premium product that you have and sell that premium product, because there is an appetite for it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And this is something that we as an organisation actually will be touching on in our training going ahead for 2021, because we intend fully to focus on, whatever the outcome of the vaccines are, to focus on how people can maximise revenue from things that aren't related to footfall. So that's, you know, off-site sales in some way, and not only digital, but that is absolutely right. We have, you know, as Bernard's touched on, we have the most astonishing buildings, collections, things that to us we take for granted every day when we go into work, like back of house stores, things like that the public never see. And it's about, for me, it's about also identifying the things that the public never see, which then becomes a double privilege, doesn't it? Like, you know, the London Underground stations that are closed, that kind of thing, that often is used for sponsorship and means of raising sponsorship funding. But I'm sure every single member of all of our organisations will have something that is a USP in that way, that they may well just take for granted because they see it daily. But wow, what a thing they can, you know, do with that wow factor. So
and on top of that, Jill, I suppose one of the things that you know, I'm hearing is that when you've got an indoor product, and indoor products can often, even though they're large places, sometimes you're defined by your smallest space in terms of the guidelines, which is utterly frustrating. But what one of the AVIA members I was speaking to last week has decided to do is to take their experience outside their building. So it'll be in the building, but you'll take people outside the building to experience the story that they're telling anyway. Now it's an urban area. So effectively what they're doing is they're going to incorporate the story that they tell into a walking tour as part of the experience that they deliver. Because they're telling the story of a certain quarter, a certain area, so they can physically bring people outdoors and bring them to certain locations that form very much a part of the story that they tell. I just think that's a brilliant idea.
It is.
Yeah, the premium product is also absolutely, Gordon, 100% right, because one of the things that, you know, if you read kind of a lot of the tourism papers that are being done globally, be it the OECDs, etc., this world, you know, what's going to return first? Well, leisure tourism is going to return first, and it's probably going to be the premium end of the market that will return first. So have you got a product, and how, and of course, premium product means that people will spend more with you. It means you don't have to, you know, worry about the mass product. So how can you actually make sure that you have a product that you must charge more for, because it is going to be a premium product, but those are the customers that are likely to be the first that we see back in the first wave of the return to international travel. So I think that way.
And yes, you're right. And you know, for those not involved in commercial activities on the call, product doesn't necessarily mean product. It's an experience, is a product at the same time, and that's absolutely what we're all searching for. We're going to have to call a halt to it there, even though it's been really brilliant, and I could go on for the entire afternoon.
Jill, can I just say that actually I've got some examples of products that didn't even exist 6 months ago, and now they're running.
Oh, Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery.
Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, London Transport Museum.
Oh, I love those. Was that your Y fronts, Bernard?
I beg your pardon?
Were those your Y fronts?
Bletchley Park, Historic Royal Palaces. Now, are these when I washed them 2 weeks ago, and it looked like I'd got the largest collection of 1970s Speedos? Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I ruined it.
This has been a joyous hour. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It has been excellent. And thank you very much indeed to Gordon, to Bernard, to Ruth, and to our audience for joining us today. Thanks ever so much. See you again.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you.
Bye. Bye.
Oh.